Here is section 1 of the script, 760 words, written in a clear, emotionally engaging, first-person narrative style, straightforward, with no fluff or repetition. As requested, I used to think that a solid marriage was built on shared routines, mutual respect, and loyalty. That's what Daniel and I had, or at least, that's what I believed for 7 years. We met in college, fell in love fast, and built a life together that felt safe, stable, and warm. He wasn't the most expressive person, but I never questioned his commitment. That changed slowly. At first, it was so subtle I couldn't even name it, just a feeling, like a draft sneaking through a closed window. We had our rhythm. Work during the day, dinner together most nights, shows on the couch, weekend errands. Nothing exciting, but comforting. Until one evening, Daniel told me about a new colleague who had joined his team. Chloe, he said casually. She's sharp, reminds me a bit of you actually. I remember smiling, not thinking much of it. But in the weeks that followed, her name came up again and again, always slipped in naturally, as part of a story. Chloe crushed the pitch today. Chloe found that bug no one else noticed. I told myself it was harmless. I trusted him, still. Things started to shift. Daniel became distant, not in a dramatic way, but in tiny increments that added up. He stopped asking me about my gay. He seemed distracted at dinner, barely touched his plate. When I brought it up, he dismissed it. Work's just intense right now. He started going into the office earlier, staying later, always on his phone. One night I walked into the living room and saw him smiling down at a message. I asked what it was. He looked startled and turned the screen away. Just something funny from the group chat, he said. I let it go, but something inside me started to harden. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife. I didn't want to turn into someone who checked phones or assumed the worst. So I stayed quiet. I waited for things to return to normal. They didn't. We stopped touching, no more absent-minded kisses in the kitchen, no more leaning on each other while watching movies. Our bed felt like a shared space between strangers. The silence was heavy. I noticed how quickly he responded to texts from Chloe, how his face lit up in ways it no longer did around me. When I mentioned her again, lightly, he snapped. Why do you keep bringing her up? She's just a coworker. I backed off, embarrassed. Maybe I was being weird. Maybe I was imagining things. But my best friend Leah wasn't convinced. Trust your gut, she told me. You're not crazy. I wanted to believe that, but I also wanted to believe in him more. The idea that Daniel could be anything other than loyal felt impossible. We built a life together. He knew me better than anyone. I thought that meant something. Then came the day he forgot our anniversary. No text, no card, nothing. I came home from work and found him on the couch, laptop open, completely unaware. I waited, thinking he was planning a surprise. But when I asked if he knew what day it was, his face went blank. Wait-o. I'm sorry, babe. I've been slammed today. That was it. No attempt to fix it. No real apology. I stared at him, trying to recognize the man I married. He looked the same, but he felt unfamiliar. That night, I sat alone in the bathroom, lights off, wondering what I was doing wrong. I pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in years and wrote down everything his. Change in behavior, the defensiveness, Chloe, the silence between us. When I looked at it on paper, it didn't feel small anymore. It felt like a pattern, something real. Still, I wasn't ready to confront him. I wasn't ready for what that would mean. I told myself people go through phases. Marriages hit rough. Patches. But deep down, I knew. I felt it in the way his eyes avoided mine, in the way his hugs had stopped feeling like home. He hadn't said it. He hadn't admitted anything. But he had already crossed a line I wasn't ready for. And part of me had already started to grieve what we used to be. Let me know when you're ready for section 2, and I'll continue with the same clarity. precision, and tone. Here is section 2 of the script, minimum 760 words. Continuing the story with the same focused, emotionally honest tone and without repetition or fluff. The night everything unraveled, I wasn't looking for proof. I had reached a place where I was trying to numb myself, just survive the cold space between us. But he left his email open on our shared tablet, and curiosity isn't always innocent. I saw Chloe's name in the inbox and something in me just knew. I clicked. What I found didn't feel like reading. It felt like drowning. There were messages, pages of them. Some recent, some weeks old. She called him babe. She talked about how she missed their late nights, about how she loved the way he made her feel. They joked about me, even referenced times they had to lie to avoid suspicion. One message said, "She doesn't suspect anything, right?" And he replied, "She's too trusting." That's what makes this so easy. My hands went cold. I kept reading, even when I wanted to stop. One email described a weekend trip they took when Daniel had told me he was at a software conference. I remembered how guilty I felt for resenting his absence. He was sleeping next to her while I was texting him good night. I didn't cry right away. My body just went still. The betrayal was too big to process in a single moment. It wasn't just the physical part. It was the deception, the manipulation, the fact that I had begged myself to be reasonable while he crafted lies behind my back. All the second-guessing, all the moments I doubted my own instincts. He had let me live in that confusion and never stopped me. When he came home that night, I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just asked him, "Is there something you want to tell me?" He froze, but only for a second. Then he went straight into denial. "What are you talking about?" His voice was calm, like he'd rehearsed. I told him I saw the emails. His face changed. Not shock, not guilt. Just exhaustion, like a man caught too late to fix anything. He didn't fight it. He didn't even ask how much I had seen. He just said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." I asked him how long it had been going on. He said a few months. Later I would find out it started a year ago. I asked if he loved her. He said no. I asked if he still loved me. He said yes, but none of it mattered. Not after what I read. Not after what he'd said about me behind my back. He cried. He said he hated himself for what he did. He said he missed us and wanted to fix things, but I couldn't hear any of it. I had been carrying doubt for months. I had excused the distance, the silence, the emotional neglect, because I believed in our vows. I honored them every day. He broke them, casually, repeatedly, while I bent myself trying to hold everything together. I packed a bag and left that night. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stay. Leah opened her door without asking questions. I didn't even have to explain. She saw it in my face. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and kept hearing Chloe's name in my head. I hated her, then hated myself for hating her. The truth was, she owed me nothing. He did. In the days that followed, Daniel sent dozens of texts. He begged me to come home. He apologized over and over, offered therapy, promised it would never happen again. He wrote long messages about how he had made a terrible mistake, how Chloe didn't mean anything, how he was scared and confused and lost. But none of it erased the fact that he had already erased me from his life long before I found out. I started going to therapy, not for the marriage, but for myself. I needed to understand why I stayed quiet for so long, why I ignored my gut, why I allowed myself to be minimized without protest. My therapist asked me a question that stuck. If he had confessed before you found out, would you have stayed? I didn't answer right away. Eventually, I realized the answer was no. Because it wasn't just the cheating. It was the choice. To lie when telling the truth would have cost him nothing but comfort. I started making a list not of what I lost, but of what I needed to rebuild. trust in myself, boundaries, self-respect. For the first time in months, I wasn't focused on what he felt. I was focused on what I deserved. He said he was scared of losing me, but he never acted like it when it would have mattered. And now that I knew the truth, I couldn't unknow it. I couldn't shrink myself to fit back into a life that had made room for someone else. Let me know when you're ready for section 3, and I'll complete the story with closure and reflection. Here is section 3 of the script, minimum 760 words, continuing with the same clarity, emotional precision, and direct narrative style. After a week at Leah's, Daniel asked to meet. I agreed, not because I wanted to fix anything, but because I needed to hear what he'd say when he couldn't hide behind a screen. He looked tired, unshaven, like someone who had finally run out of excuses. He said he missed me, that he was willing to do anything to make things right. He said he'd cut Chloe off completely, that she meant nothing, that what we had was worth fighting for. I sat across from him and listened. But I didn't feel the pull to forgive. I didn't feel much at all. Just distance. He had already taken too much. And I had already lived too long in silence. He asked what I needed to trust him again. I told him the truth. I didn't need to trust him again. I needed to trust myself. And that meant not giving someone the chance to hurt me twice. I could see it in his face. He thought I would come back. That if he cried hard enough, apologized long enough, I'd soften. But I didn't. I had already done the math. Forgiveness is not the same as staying. And love is not the same as tolerating betrayal. He said he made a mistake. I said no, he made a choice. Over and over. Every text, every lie, every moment he looked me in the eyes and pretended nothing was wrong. That wasn't a single moment of weakness. That was a pattern. That was who he chose to be when he thought I'd never find out. I saw his tears, but they weren't for what he did. They were for being caught. And I wasn't going to carry the burden of repairing something I didn't break. I moved out of our apartment 2 weeks later. It was painful in ways I can't explain. Everything inside it was soaked in memories, good ones, real ones. But I had to separate the history from the truth. And the truth was, those memories didn't protect me. They couldn't erase what he did, or how easily he did it. I walked away not because I stopped loving him, but because I started loving myself more. Starting over felt unfamiliar. I didn't bounce back. I unraveled slowly, carefully. I cried in the shower. I deleted pictures. I wrote long letters I never sent. But for the first time, the pain wasn't from being lied to. It was the pain of healing. And healing is honest. I started rebuilding my life on terms that didn't include waiting for someone else to treat me like I mattered. I set boundaries. I said no without guilt. I stopped making space for people who only showed up when it was convenient. Leah reminded me every day that I wasn't weak for not seeing it sooner. That trusting someone is not a flaw. That staying loyal to your values, even when someone else doesn't, is not a mistake. I learned that I could miss him and still walk away. That I could grieve the version of us I thought was real and still move forward. I didn't hate Daniel. I didn't need to. I didn't stalk Chloe. I didn't look for revenge. None of it would undo what happened. And the truth is, I didn't want the old version of our life back. It wasn't as whole as I thought it was. Now I wanted peace. I wanted clarity. I wanted a life where I didn't have to question the ground I stood on. Eventually, I stopped checking my phone expecting his name. I stopped rehearsing what I'd say if we crossed paths. I stopped defining myself as someone who had been cheated on. I became someone who left when she realized she deserved better. That identity felt real. It felt earned. It felt like mine. If someone asked me now what betrayal feels like, I'd say it's not just the moment of discovery. It's the months leading up to it, when you feel your worth shrinking, when you second-guess yourself, when you defend someone who's already erased you from their plans. And if they asked what healing feels like, I'd say it's the first deep breath you take after choosing yourself over someone who never did. Asterisk. He crossed a line I wasn't ready for, but I didn't stay there. I walked away. And in doing so, I reminded myself that pain isn't what defines me. Strength does. And I don't need his closure to move on. I only needed mine. Let me know if you'd like a final polish or to package the full story together as a script document. Here is section 4 of the script, minimum 760 words, continuing with the same tone, precise, emotionally grounded, and free of repetition or fluff. 6 months passed before I felt steady again. Not fully healed, but grounded enough to look at the past without collapsing into it. I wasn't trying to erase what happened. I was learning how to live beyond it. There were days I still felt the sting, moments when a song, a smell, or a phrase brought everything back. But those moments became quieter, less defining. I stopped asking why he did it. That question never had a satisfying answer. The truth was simple. He betrayed me because he could, and because he thought I wouldn't notice or wouldn't leave. Asterisk. I ran into one of Daniel's old co-workers at a grocery store. She looked surprised to see me, asked how I'd been. I gave the usual answer, doing well, taking things one day at a time. Then she said, without warning, Chloe doesn't work there anymore. Heard things didn't work out. I nodded, kept a neutral face, and walked away. I didn't care about their outcome. Whether they stayed together or fell apart didn't affect what happened to me. I wasn't looking for karma. I was focused on building something that had nothing to do with them. Me asterisk. What I learned through all of this wasn't just about infidelity. It was about silence. The kind that creeps into a relationship long before the cheating starts. The fundu kind where emotional disconnection becomes normal, and you stop reaching for each other. We weren't fighting before he cheated. We weren't even angry. We were just flat, quiet, disconnected. And instead of addressing it, he found someone who filled the silence with validation. I could say he should have told me we were drifting. I could say I should have asked harder questions. But at the end of the day, it wasn't about what we didn't say. It was about what he chose to do with that silence. Asterisk. I've heard people say cheating is a symptom of a broken relationship. Maybe sometimes it is. But in my case, it wasn't the relationship that broke first. It was his integrity. He didn't try to fix what was wrong. He just decided to leave emotionally while keeping me as a backup plan. That's what hurt the most, not that he found someone else, but that he left me in the dark while pretending we were okay. Asterisk. I began seeing a version of myself I hadn't known before. Stronger, sharper, less willing to shrink to make others comfortable. I didn't feel bitter. I felt clear. I stopped romanticizing the past. I started setting standards that didn't leave room for half-hearted love. I told myself often, it's not your job to convince someone to choose you. It's your job to choose yourself when they don't. Asterisk. There were people who told me I should have tried harder to forgive. That every marriage deserves a second chance. I disagreed quietly. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. And not every betrayal deserves to be redeemed. Some choices fracture the foundation so deeply that rebuilding means building somewhere else entirely. I didn't want to live in a house that had burned down just because someone offered to repaint the walls. Asterisk. I started saying yes to things I'd once put off. I booked a solo trip, joined a local writing group, enrolled in a course I'd talked about for years. I created routines that were mine alone, simple things like coffee walks, evening journaling, Saturday mornings with no plans. Slowly, I filled the space he left with pieces of myself I'd been neglecting. I wasn't healing to become more appealing to someone else. I was healing for me, so I could look in the mirror and see someone I respected, someone I trusted again. Daniel reached out once more. A long message. He said he hoped I was well, that he was working on himself, that he still thought about me. I read it without emotion. Not because I didn't care, but because I had already made peace with the version of him that loved me, and with the one that didn't. I didn't respond, not out of spite, just out of clarity. I owed him nothing. Not my time, not my energy, not another conversation. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering if I missed a final sign, something I should have seen sooner. But healing taught me that self-blame doesn't lead to wisdom. It just delays closure. I did the best I could with the information I had. And when I finally had the truth, I made the right choice. The story didn't end the way I imagined. But it ended exactly when it needed to. And what came after wasn't empty. It was honest. It was mine. That's the part I'm holding on. 2. Let me know if you'd like the entire 4-part script compiled into one document or formatted for voiceover use.